Today's episode is brought to you by Growing for Market magazine. For 31 years, Growing for Market magazine has been the source of practical ideas and information for direct market vegetable and flower growers. All articles are written by farmers who get their hands dirty and know what they're doing. If you do farmers markets, CSA, farm stand, pick your own, florist sales, or wholesaling, whether you're a commercial grower or want to grow like one, subscribe to Growing for Market for the nitty-gritty details of growing, marketing, and the business of small farming. Available as paper magazine and a digital download with thousands of archived articles available. Use the coupon code WORM, that's WORM, to get 25% off any subscription at growingformarket.com. Today's episode is also brought to you by Rimmel Greenhouses.
Whether it's tomatoes to market, flowers in the spring, or your family's harvest, growing in a greenhouse protected from the weather provides the right environment that you need for a harvest that you can count on. Rimmel greenhouses are designed for durability and offer the quality that you need to grow productively year-round. Visit rimmelgreenhouses.com to get a quote today.
If I may editorialize for a second, I own a Rimmel tunnel. I love it. We built it ourselves, and I really appreciated the quality of the tunnel as well as the customer service we received in the process. So make sure to check them out. All right, let's jam. Hey, you all, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to the No-Till Market Garden Podcast, episode 16, season 4. Got a great episode for you all this week with Sarah Barney of Among the Oaks in Eastern Kentucky. We have not covered much from Appalachia in the podcast, and further, we have not spent much, if any, time on herbs, but that is exactly what Among the Oaks does. Sarah has a master's in ecology and studied hummingbirds and pest control on coffee farms, which we discuss for a minute. We talk about the size and scale of the herb market. We also discuss how to make one's farm a welcoming place for people with disabilities, which Sarah includes herself among. So it's great perspective, and I loved having this conversation. But first, if there's still some time in your schedule for a little conferencing, you can catch me in Ohio at the OEFFA conference on February 17th, or in Texas for the Mother Earth News Fair immediately following that on the 19th and 20th of February. I will also be presenting virtually at NOFA, Vermont on the 26th, and the ACORN, Atlantic Canadian Organic Regional Network Conference, on the 28th. And then the Indiana Small Farmers Conference in March. Those are all 2022, and I hope to see you there. Let's do some quick Patreon shout-outs. Patreon is the driver of our work. There are hundreds of people kicking in a few bucks every month so that we can keep creating this content and all the things that we do, and keeping it free for anyone and everyone. If you appreciate it and you want to support our work, go to patreon.com/no-till-growers and kick in a few bucks. There are discounts on merch and on the Living Soil Handbook, for instance, and events when we get back to all that. But at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, even from $2 to $5, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs this week to Amelia Crabtree, that's my family, Stephen Smith, Ojai Roots, Scott Snodgrass, Lucas Brendel, Jacob Arthur, and Yannick LaPlante. Big thanks to everyone who supports our show in whatever way that you can. Buying a copy of the Living Soil Handbook specifically from no-tillgrowers.com is a great way to do it. You can always just Venmo us a few bucks to @no-till-growers just to say thanks. There are lots of young farmers out there who may not be able to swing a few bucks every month. Think of them. We appreciate all the support and will continue to crank out awesome stuff for you, like this amazing episode with Sarah Barney from Among the Oaks. Sarah Barney, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And thank you for coming on. So let's just start where we always start. Give us the rundown. Where are you located, the size and scale you're working on, and those sorts of things?
Yeah, so I'm the owner and lead farmer at Among the Oaks Herb Farm, and we are located in Beattyville, Kentucky, in the Appalachian Hills of Eastern Kentucky, right on the south side of the Red River Gorge, if you're familiar with the area. And as for the specifics of the farm, we have about 9 acres of flat pasture, which is where we grow. And that's bordered on one side by the North Fork of the Kentucky River, and the other side is the rest of the property, which is about 40 acres of steep, hardwood forest. And so that's the whole farm. And so we're currently just growing in that pasture, and it's all in a floodplain of the river. So it has really nice alluvial soils, beautiful texture, and it's very fertile naturally. But it comes with the downside of being in a floodplain, which we could talk more about maybe later. We're in zone 6B, so we've got 4 distinct seasons. So it's the growing season is feeling more and more tropical to me these days. Let's see, as far as like big picture issues with growing things in this area, we have lots of sunshine and water and nice soil and a decently long growing season. So I would say our issues are more so with things related to it being such a nice place to grow. And sorry, that's my dog in the background. Hopefully he
No, dogs are totally welcome.
So yeah, our issues are more so with it being such a great place to grow. So, other things are growing that we don't want to, like fungus and weeds and wildlife and things like that. And then the floodplain is also definitely a challenge.
How often does that flood?
So it's hard to say. Basically, like the level that we grow at, we call that let's call that the upper bank. And then there's this lower bank. The lower bank has flooded at least twice a year in the past 4 years that we have been there. And the upper bank flooded one time, and it was like a catastrophic flood. And that was last year, and it was the most water that has ever gone through that area, like in recorded history. And I think historically, that field has probably flooded once every few hundred years, but it doesn't look like that's going to keep being the case.
Right.
So we are assuming that it could be flooded at any time, and that's kind of how we go into things, is assuming that.
And then, sorry, I interrupted. You were going to talk about your crops.
Yeah. So we grow exclusively herbs. This year we'll have a little over 40 different species. And the things that we grow the most of are ginger and turmeric, holy basil or tulsi, lemon balm, calendula, and chamomile. But we grow lots of other things, a lot of like perennial native meadow plants like echinacea, mountain mint, yarrow. We grow a decent amount of like mints, like peppermint and catnip. And we also grow woody perennials, which we integrate within our other crops. And so those woodies that we're growing are elders, roses, raspberry, which we grow for the leaf actually, and linden and hawthorn. But those are both very small still. So kind of what it looks like is you can imagine like a veggie market garden, but it's with medicinal herbs, which kind of just looks like more kind of weedy flowers. It's kind of how it appears.
Nice. And so you said those things are mixed together. So when that upper area flooded, like I was thinking, like, were you planting your perennials kind of where maybe they, could take a little bit of water and your annuals up on that upper side, but it sounds like you're kind of planting them all together.
So we're growing only in that upper portion. I think the folks that we bought it from, I know that they would plant some like sweet potatoes and things like that in the lower portion of the bank, but it floods way too frequently. I personally would never plant anything there. So basically the only space we have that is fit to grow plants is in this floodplain, which is pretty common in Appalachia. You either have the flat spaces on ridge tops where you've got cruddy soil, or it's in a floodplain. And in some ways, I kind of appreciate being in the river floodplain because we are dealing with, the floods are big, but they're less frequent and you can kind of predict them a little better. Whereas a lot of folks in Appalachia deal with flash flooding, where their creeks will rise really quick. And those can be actually a lot more destructive.
Right.
Yeah, so we had in 2021 a little more than half an acre in production, and by the end of this year, we'll have a little more than an acre in production. And we started growing. I started farming like on my own in 2019, but it was on rented land. And then we bought the farm and started farming at our current location in 2020. So this will be our third season on this farm, and this will be the first year that I'm actually working full time on the farm. And I also have an employee that works 3 days a week, and that's the whole farm crew is the two of us.
You mentioned that you have 9 acres in total of like open, right?
Yeah.
What are you doing with the rest of that acreage? Is it just hay, field, or how are you utilizing that?
Before we bought the place, this whole field was in hay production for about a decade. And before that, it was in tobacco. So what we're doing right now is we honestly aren't doing anything, and we're just trying to let everything grow back and like keep some more carbon, since so much has been taken from there, and kind of just observing. And I want to see what plants are coming back, and then we'll likely eventually burn it and keep expanding our herb production. And then the hope is to do some more agroforestry, kind of less intensively managed native meadow in some of it.
In your background, you studied ecology, right? Like that's your background?
Yeah, that's how I came into farming, actually, is studying ecology of farms. So yeah, that was my first introduction to farms, is doing like insect ecology research as an undergrad. And that took me to work on lots of different farms. And I initially wanted to be like an ecologist, like researcher or professor. And so I followed that path for a while. I eventually got a master's degree in agroecology. And my thesis, I studied hummingbird and insect interactions on coffee farms, which is as cool as it sounds, honestly. And so I spent a lot of time on farms doing research, and that's the part I always liked the best, and that's kind of how I got the bug. So eventually I gave up all the other parts and just went all in on farming.
Fascinating. Well, I mean, I'm kind of curious about this and this relationship with the coffee farm and the hummingbirds. Like, what were your big takeaways there? What were you kind of studying in that? Like, I'm just curious what that relationship between the hummingbirds, the coffee farms, the whole ecology there.
Yeah. So the short answer is I was looking at working on different coffee farms with different types of management. So coffee farms tend to be either managed with a shaded overstory or not. And when they're not, it's called sun coffee. And so I was trying to figure out kind of the density of hummingbirds when you manage your coffee differently, and then if that has cascading effects on like biocontrol. So hummingbirds are pollinators, but they also eat a lot of insects. And some coffee pests are very small and are things that hummingbirds eat. And so the big takeaways, I guess, were that hummingbirds are living on the shaded coffee farms much more, but they actually will travel pretty far distances into the sun coffee if there's neighboring ones. And it appears as if they definitely are providing some kind of like biological control services.
Less insect damage in the shade coffee than there was in the sun coffee?
Well, no. So it's way more complicated than that, because there's just so many players in it. So that would have taken many more years of research to actually figure that out. But my research was basically understanding that if you are managing your coffee with shade as more of a kind of complex natural ecosystem, you're going to host a lot more hummingbirds. And based on observational data, they're eating a lot of insects in the coffee, like on the coffee plants themselves.
I mean, that same thing probably translates to gardens too, right? Like they're we see hummingbirds around a lot. We often plant Tithonia and crops that bring in hummingbirds. Are they also likely eating insects in gardens? I mean, is that something that like we could create habitat and such for hummingbirds and improve that pest management a little bit?
I think so. When I was studying this, I found one example of like a news article of someone who was growing, I want to say it was blueberries, and they were putting out hummingbird feeders for the spotted-winged Drosophila, because hummingbirds are eating really tiny stuff like fruit flies. And so I think if you have issues with those kinds of pests, there's definitely potential that hummingbirds could be helpful. And that's on my long kind of farm to-do list, is to put some stakes in and put hummingbird feeders around, just to see what happens.
That's
cool. I'm very curious about it too.
Okay, so I'm going to make you talk about hummingbirds for one more second. What is when I think of a hummingbird feeder, I think of like that sugar watery weird, like corn syrupy stuff that people put out. What is what is like the ecologist version of that?
So what you want to do is actually buy white sugar, and I think it's 25% sugar water. That's actually what you want to do. What you want to avoid is, sometimes you can buy it and it has food coloring in it, so that's really bad for the hummingbirds. And the other thing is that you want to clean it because they can get sick from it getting moldy and stuff like that. But they actually having the white sugar is closer to like that really simple kind of solution. They can digest it really easily, and it's pretty similar to nectar in that way, and that's what they actually want.
And they just nest in trees and stuff, right? Like they just build nests pretty much like most tree nesting birds.
Yeah, they make the cutest little nests, and they use spider webs to hold it together.
What? That's cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so sorry,
Yeah.
Sorry for that digression. But
That's okay.
I mean, when I get somebody that has a master's degree in ecology, I'm gonna pick your brain.
Yeah.
Okay, so how, so talk a little bit about your market. Like where do the herbs and such go?
Yeah, so it's pretty complicated. I do a lot of different things. So the list is, we sell our herbs in bulk, fresh or dried. And when we sell them fresh, we actually mostly ship them, which is pretty common for herb farms, because there's not that many herb farms. A lot of people don't have access to like fresh medicinal herbs where they live, and so they will order them, from the closest one. So that's like a pretty weird thing that we do. And then we also process our herbs on site into a dried form. It's called cut and sift, is like the standard size that people want them in. And so we do that and sell them in bulk. And by bulk, I mean at least a pound, fresh or dried. And, we have lots of different types of customers for those things. Everything from like the average person who just wants to make some medicine for their family, to clinical herbalists who are making medicine for their clients. We also work with a lot of like herbal products brands or skincare brands who infuse herbs into their stuff. And so they tend to buy, higher quantities of herbs. So I want to say like our biggest order this year is probably, for one person, it's like 50 pounds of fresh herbs or maybe 30 pounds of dried herbs. And so, we do the bulk herbs, and then we also dry a lot of our herbs and craft them into our own line of herbal tea blends, like loose leaf tea blends. And so we sell those on our website, and we also wholesale those just in Kentucky right now. So like at a lot of grocery stores or coffee shops, stuff like that. We also do a CSA, but it's an herbal product CSA. So instead of folks getting like a weekly share of vegetables, they get a quarterly share of herbal products. And there's a lot that goes into that. It's quite an interesting setup. And then we also go to our local farmers market, which it actually just started last year, and we didn't go the whole season, but we're going to go every week this year. And so there we sell mostly just our loose leaf tea blends, and then we also sell herbal tea by the cup. I think that's all of them.
So maybe we can get a few more details on the CSA, the herbal product CSA. What all herbal products, is it like salves? Is it, you mentioned teas. Are there other value-added products that are going into that herbal product CSA?
Yeah. So, well, first I'll say the CSA is like a collaboration with another grower and an herbalist in Eastern Kentucky, and she grows a lot of mushrooms. And so for each share, we always have a tea, and so that comes from me. We usually have some kind of like mushroom culinary thing, so like mushroom hot cocoa or like a mushroom spice blend or something. Sometimes we also do like herb infused salts or other herbal blends. There might be like an herb infused honey or a syrup. We usually include a tincture, which is an alcohol extract, and then there's also always a topical. So that would be a salve or like herbal bug spray or something like that. And it also, the CSA is like it's a labor of love, and we try to make it very experiential and really try to build community around this like living seasonally and herbalism and things like that. And so with the CSA, when you're a member, you also get a zine each quarter that has lots of information about herbs and recipes and kind of some deeper background behind each of the products in that box. And then we also do pickup events, which is an opportunity for folks to visit the farm, either my farm or the collaborator's farm, Joanna. And then we do like plant walks where we identify plants and medicine making workshops and things like that. We also ship the CSA anywhere, but most of our customers are in Kentucky and want to come together for the kind of community building aspect of it.
And then so with those value-added products, the only one that you're really selling outside of the CSA is the teas, right? Or are there other products like that?
Sometimes I do like herbal salts and other kind of culinary blends, but basically just tea.
Okay. And I'm one of the things that I kind of wanted to understand a little bit better in this conversation is like the market as a whole, like the herb market. You talked about where it goes, but like how big is this market? Like, do you feel as though you're in a position to meet the demand, or is the demand bigger than what you can meet, than what you can produce? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So it's complicated. I'm not sure what like the absolute size of the market is, but there's definitely more demand than supply, like for me personally, and I think just in the United States. The U.S. imports like the majority of the botanicals we use. I wish I knew the exact number, but most of them. And, in my lifetime, I've seen this kind of change in our culture, where folks they want to know where does their food come from, and they are wanting to support, more ethical sourcing and buy it locally. And then I think that's been happening more with like body care products and other kind of household products. And I think supplements and those types of, and the kind of herbal products are kind of next in that shift in thinking. So I see more and more folks are starting to understand some of the ethical implications of like global sourcing for herbs and wanting to source them domestically, but also the herbal market, like herbal product market, is growing really rapidly right now. And especially since the pandemic, I think a lot of folks are just wanting to take their health more into their own hands and, have more tools in their toolkit. And so that's causing a huge demand in herbal products, right, which is creating a bigger demand for herbs. So it's changing quite fast, and that's part of the hard part of what I do is I feel like I just have to kind of keep an eye on everything and adapt to what the demand looks like each year. I don't feel like I could just come up with like a 5-year business plan and just execute it, because it seems like it changes a lot. Like the price for everything changes a lot. Which herbs people want changes a lot. They tend to kind of go in and out of like trend pretty quickly, it seems like. But yeah, in general, there's a lot of demand for herbs. But it's not a matter of like, there's a lot of challenges to growing herbs, and that's part of the reason that the supply isn't meeting the demand. From my perspective, it's not just that farmers haven't like caught up to these trends fast enough. There's like a lot of other barriers, I guess, to being a successful herb farmer.
Can you talk about those? Like what's one that comes to mind? I mean, I think of like perennials that often are complicated because it takes so long to get them established, but are there other barriers?
Yeah, there's quite a few. I would say one is regulation. So I don't want to go too much into that, but it's very complicated to market herbs when most folks don't know that much about them, and there's regulations in place that make it so that you cannot tell them about them. That also applies to like value-added products, and there's tons of regulations around making value-added herbal products. So that's a big barrier. There's also there's not like a history of growing herbs at scale in the United States, and so there's not access to like equipment, specialized equipment at a small scale for small scale growers. There's not access to very much information. So like, if you have a disease with your tomato, there's books all about tomato diseases. You can just look it up. You can call your extension agent, whatever. For the crops that I'm growing, if I try to look up diseases on marshmallow, I get these, information about planting 2 plants in your garden, and I'll just read stuff about how there's no disease pressure. So it's really hard to get the information that you need to actually successfully grow herbs at scale. And then the last thing is that because we have been importing them for so long and like are used to the prices that come from often unethical labor practices with that sourcing, the margins for herbs are very thin, and unless you're using a lot of equipment, it's insanely labor intensive. So yeah, there's a lot of barriers.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think of like a lot of times you're picking flowers, you're picking individual leaves, like, for a vegetable farmer, to use your example of the tomato, I just go out and I get a bin and I pick, 100 pounds of tomatoes without a problem. And they're selling for $2-4 a pound. What is, with that in mind, like what does pricing look like? Like, how do you do that?
Yeah. Okay. So I have an example for you here. If we think about lemon balm, so right now, my pricing, which is similar to other folks, if I sold a fresh pound of lemon balm, it would be $14 a pound, which is really good. If I had the local demand for fresh herbs, it would be amazing. But I don't. And so that's part of the reason that I grow herbs, actually, is so that I can process them and send them other places, because I don't have a lot of local markets. But if I sell a dried pound of lemon balm, it's $33, and that's before any kind of volume discounts or anything like that. But you have to keep in mind that for lemon balm, there's like a moisture ratio of 5 to 1. So it takes 5 pounds of fresh lemon balm to make 1 dried pound of lemon balm, and that's on the stem still. So then you have to garble it, which is the process of like de-stemming it. So you're going to lose some more volume there. And so basically what that means is for 5 pounds of lemon balm, I could have sold that for $70 if it was fresh, or $33 if it was dried, and it takes way more labor to get it into the dried form. And then if I sold it as tea, I could sell it for $160. So that's what most small scale herb farmers are doing, is making their own products so that they can capture that value add themselves, because the margins are so thin. It's hard to explain if you haven't done it, but like how much work it takes to produce a dried pound of herbs is kind of insane. And so, yeah, $33 is like kind of an average for a lot of the like leafy dried herbs.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, picking that much of any sort of fresh herb like that I can imagine picking, for instance, 30 pounds or 50 pounds of basil would take a long time.
Hey, you all, just jumping in here real quick to get a word from our show sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Tilth Soil. Tilth Soil, this Cleveland, Ohio-based company, is producing some of the highest quality soil mixes out there. That's why I included their work in my book and use their products on my farm. This is true. Tilth Soil makes composts and potting mixes approved for use in certified organic operations like my own. Their living compost is made from food waste they haul and compost themselves, and it is the cornerstone of all of their blends. Tilth Soils take regenerative and organic growing to a new level. For more information on their products, including bulk ordering and their nationwide shipping, visit www.tilthsoil.com. All right, back to the show.
So with the drying herbs, do you have to do that to make those teas and stuff? Do you have to do that in a commercial kitchen? And maybe that's different by location, but do you specifically have to do it?
It depends. So the short answer, I do, but the short answer is that if you're making an herbal product, if you're making a dietary supplement, you have to follow federal regulations, and that includes making it in a commercial kitchen and following GMPs. It's the type of thing where you don't apply or anything, you just have to follow the rules, and you might get audited, but you don't have to like report anything. And so this is a really big oversimplification, but like, for example, what would make something a dietary supplement is if you make any claims that have anything to do with like your body. So say you said it supports immune health, then it goes into this dietary supplement category. So in Kentucky, you can make tea as like a food product, which also has to be made with a food manufacturing permit, and so you have to do it in a commercial kitchen. So I do that, yeah.
That regulation note is really interesting. This idea of like you're growing a product that people are buying for and associating with their health, but you can't really outright say that it's what it's good for. Like, so
yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about how that works and like how you navigate that?
Yeah, so it's pretty intense because it's not just that I couldn't write supports immune function on packaging. It's not just that. I could not post on my Instagram or in a newsletter or anywhere. I am not allowed to say anything like that. And so even if it's like backed up with peer-reviewed research, I'm not allowed to cite that research or say it or anything at all, because that is considered a claim on my product. If you don't sell herbs or sell any herbal products, you can teach about herbalism, and it's totally fine. And so the reality is that in the kind of herbal world, most people are either teaching or they're selling herbs or making products and kind of relying on each other to do the other person's job. And a lot of folks bend the rules too, either because they don't know or because they feel that it's unethical to not be able to share that information. And so for me personally, that's part of why I just do herbal teas. It's very safe. It's a food product, and I cannot make claims about it, and that's fine. It's hard with other herbal products. It's harder to kind of get away with that. And so that's part of what I do in addition to being a farmer is I do a lot of like community organizing around herbs, where we host events and host different teachers and teach people. And so, I don't directly educate people about herbs through the farm, but I'm trying to help educate my community in general about herbs so that they're more informed themselves, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's so interestingly complex.
Yeah, it is. It's really hard, honestly.
Like, who's keeping up with whether or not these products are not being, touted as specific remedies for something, or like, is it? You mentioned the audit. Is that what it is? It's not like you're submitting your labels for each of your products, or
right.
It's that you're selling these products and they can just come audit you whenever they want to.
Yeah. So like I submit my labels and stuff to the state of Kentucky because I'm marketing mine as a food product. But if you're making a dietary supplement, then basically, yeah, you don't submit anything. You don't have to register or anything. You don't talk to anyone. It's just that at any moment, if the USDA approaches you, then, or the FDA, excuse me, they can ask to see what you're doing and everything like that. And they will send you a letter. If they find something online, they'll send you a letter that's like a warning, basically. And what's kind of hard now is that they're using like bots to crawl the internet to do that. So even if you have a very small business and you're just like selling at the farmer's market, if you're posting stuff you're not supposed to online, it's possible that they'll find you. And they're really cracking down on this stuff more and more because of COVID, because folks are advertising their products as curing COVID, which absolutely you shouldn't do. Like some of the things that people are getting in trouble for, like I totally agree. They shouldn't be making those kinds of claims. But yeah, so they're taking it more seriously now, trying to find anyone who's making claims about COVID.
Right. I mean, you could put somebody at serious risk if they believe that this is going to prevent COVID or whatever it could be, whatever disease.
Yeah, exactly.
We exchanged messages about possibly talking a little bit about making your farm safe and equitable place for disabled folks. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I guess I'll start by saying that I consider myself disabled. I'm autistic, and I also have some chronic health issues, including a heart condition that can make some types of physical labor especially hard for me, especially when I'm standing. And so I've had to kind of learn how to farm in my own way, to meet the needs of my body, I guess. And I've worked at a lot of places where I didn't feel I was accommodated for my needs. And so that's part of why I actually started the farm and my own business, is so that I could be my own boss and be more flexible to my needs. And so through all this stuff, I think a lot about how to accommodate disabled folks and about ableism in general. And, it's a big topic that I don't want to get into, but like, in short, ableism is kind of a hallmark of American culture, I think. And historically, especially, it's like a hallmark of farming culture. It's kind of like, oh, you have to work long hours and just push through the pain and be gritty and, not complain about it kind of stuff. And so, yeah, what I wanted to share was just some kind of like practical tips if you are a farm owner and you're hiring folks, how to, make your farm safe for disabled folks, and just have less issues with ableism in general, because the reality is ableism negatively affects everyone, not just disabled folks. So I guess the first thing I would say is that if you're a manager, no matter how cool of a manager you think you are, there's like a power dynamic between you and your employees. And I think it's the responsibility of you as a manager to be proactive about your employees' health and well-being, I guess, as it relates to their work, and to make sure that you're doing everything you can to create an environment in which it's a safe space for like open and honest communication. And there's all kinds of other benefits to that. But, you want your employees to feel safe to tell you that they have a disability, or that they are struggling with some other kind of health problem, whether it's disabling or not. And so I guess that's the first thing, is to like try to create that space for safe communication, and realize that not only people might not tell you anyways, and that's okay. They have the right to do that, but just to be aware that disabled folks might have a lot of fear to tell you that they are disabled. And there's a lot of invisible disabilities that folks just suffer silently through because they don't feel like they will be accommodated if they say anything about it. And so with that, the other thing is like to never assume somebody's health status just by looking at them. I think that's a really important way to just move through the world, honestly. Like, you never know what's going on with people. And in our culture, we're taught to like just kind of push through a lot of things and just not talk about it. And that can be really hard to do impossible for some folks, depending on what they've got going on. So like for me personally, when I'm hiring folks, I try to talk to them about like what their health needs are in relation to working with me, whether that's like if they're autistic too, or maybe they just have like a chronic shoulder injury that flares up when they do certain kinds of activities, and I do the same thing where I share that kind of information with the people that I work with. And for me, it's created this culture in which, if there's something that is especially challenging to someone, whether they physically feel like they can't do it, or even if they're just worried that they will like cause like a flare up of a chronic injury, then we can just talk about it and they can do something else. And I do the same thing where there's certain activities that are really hard for me, and the folks that I work with do those, and I do other things instead. And so, yeah, I think that's really important to think about. And then the other thing that I wanted to share is like that's with respect to like supporting disabled folks that might work for you. But, we got to think about this for ourselves too, like as farm owners or managers, to like take care of ourselves, I guess, our mind and our body, and to listen. I feel like, I don't know if this is like true with data, but I feel like your physical or mental burnout from like a farm owner is just as likely to like ruin your business as disease outbreaks or some other, crop failures, not having markets to take your things to. It's just as important to consider those things and to make sure that you're try to dismantle that ableism within yourself so that you can be a better steward of your own body and actually listen to what your needs are, because your business will be much more sustainable. I think if you make it, as long as you can doing it.
Yeah, that's great. I think a lot about, there are certain people that are always going to be good at managing other people, and there are certain people that's not a skill they're going to excel at. And being aware of either improving that skill or finding somebody else to help you with that management side, I think is always important. But those check-ins, just checking in with your employees and figuring out, whether or not they're comfortable doing a certain task, or whether or not they're exhausted and not telling you, they're not drinking enough water. Those things, I've found that if you let that go on too long, or if you miss it, maybe they're out the next day, or maybe they're out the next few days with dehydration or exhaustion or something. And that has, greater impacts on your business, but it's also really awful for them. And that was something that could have been avoided with check-ins. And the same sort of thing applies to yourself, just checking in and being like, am I okay right now? Do I need to take a break? Do I need to stop and reevaluate?
Yep. Yeah. Farmers are passionate folks. So I feel like it's easy for us to just kind of push through, sometimes to our own detriment.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's hard. I mean, we always talk about how dynamic of a business farming is, because it's manufacturing, it's production, it's marketing, it's all the things. And it's also, you were also the HR, and that either hiring somebody or having somebody do that's really excels at communication with people, or just really taking the time to learn that. And I think one of the biggest things you kind of touched on is I don't know if you use the word empathy, but that's sort of the idea, is like developing an amount of empathy of just when somebody says like, oh, I'm tired, or oh, I'm exhausted, like take them seriously. I think that's kind of an important lesson.
Yeah, definitely. Because I think, at least from my experience, if you create an environment where folks feel safe, they're not going to tell you that they're tired or whatever when they're not, because they feel safe, and like they can just listen to their body, and that you respect them. And so from my experience, I feel like, I have much better relationships with folks, but it's also like, it's honestly more productive, and that's definitely not the goal at all, but it feels more productive, I guess, in the end.
Right. And everybody, opening up that line of communication, like you mentioned, sharing with your employees that you're autistic, and that, the being able to be open with them first maybe helps to open up that line of communication, so that they feel like they can share things with you when they're not feeling a certain way. Like when you don't tell anybody anything, I'm particularly bad about this. My wife says that I'm she like had no idea if I even liked her when we first met. But it's just my personality. But I've tried to develop that warmness, that openness of being like able to share something, so that person knows they can share something with me, or so that they know that I'm able to be open and tell them something, or hear something that they have to tell me.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And that's what I mean by, I think it's as a manager or whatever, it's our responsibility first, I think, to be proactive in that way, right? And if that means, being vulnerable about yourself, then that's what you need to do.
And I have to think too, to some extent, that somebody who, maybe even like yourself, who wants to work on an herb farm, or work, in herbalism to some extent, also has some healing to do themselves, and like probably, or even in vegetables. I mean, we get, a lot of people that want to work for us really just want to know where their food comes from, and want to be involved with the soil more. So like a lot of people that are getting into this business are getting into it precisely because they need to do some healing. And, to that extent, we have to be conscious of it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think you hit the nail on the head there. It's true.
Maybe you could talk a little bit about, maybe chamomile could be an interesting one. I feel like that's like I'm trying it in the pathways, but maybe
I'm curious about that.
Yeah, me too. Maybe we could talk about it. Talk a little bit about, if you're up for it, talk a little bit about chamomile production, like how that's a crop that I think is really interesting. I love chamomile tea. Yeah. The kids love it. It's like it's nice to have around. It's very soothing.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about chamomile production and what that looks like?
Yeah. Well, first I'll say that there's a lot of demand for chamomile, both fresh and dried. It's a plant that I probably get the most requests for. And I feel like it is a good candidate to kind of integrate into lots of different kinds of farms, if you're growing vegetables already. Um, but yeah, so it looks kind of different depending on where you live. But the way a lot of folks grow chamomile is to actually direct seed chamomile in the late summer or fall, and it will form a little green rosette and survive over the winter. And then in the early spring, it'll shoot up and flower. And then it will die that year after it flowers, and then you plant it again. And it's the kind of thing that I know some people that kind of just broadcast it in a really dense planting. I haven't tried that, but I think I'm going to experiment in one bed this year and do that. But it's planted pretty densely. It's at least, and from my experience, I feel like it does well when it's kind of clumped together and it has that microclimate of being a bunch of little seedlings together. And so even when I transplant it, I grow a lot of seeds, like per cell of a transplant. And it's quite labor intensive in that, one, it's hard to keep it weeded, I guess, just because of the leaves are very fragile and you plant it pretty densely. I don't think it's really a good candidate to be in like landscape fabric or something like that. So you got to stay on top of the weeds. And then harvesting it, you're just harvesting the open blooms. And so what most folks do that grow it at scale is use a chamomile rake, which I'm pretty sure is just like a modified blueberry rake. And so it's just this little handheld tool that has a bunch of little tines, and you slide it over the tops of the plants and pull up, and you just rip the flower heads off. And then they're very fragile, and so we do ship them fresh to folks, but they don't last for very long, when you harvest them like that. So we dry a lot of them. And one of the reasons I think it could be a good candidate for like anyone to grow, add to your vegetable farm, is that they dry really well in a dehydrator, and they're pretty, which you could just have like a small dehydrator at your house. You don't have to have a full drying facility or anything. And they're pretty high value, like per pound or whatever. So, you could sell small bags of them at the farmer's market and not have that much total. And I feel like that would be worth the effort. I want to say, let me look here what my, okay. So like this year I'm selling chamomile for $30 a pound fresh or $75 a pound dried. Yeah.
How much space does it take to get like a pound of chamomile, or and maybe you get multiple harvests, but how much space do you think it takes to get that much?
So I don't have great data myself, but like based on, there's some good yield data. There's basically one good herb farming book that has a lot of yield data in it. And so for them, they say 50 dried pounds per eighth of an acre, which is pretty low compared to basically any other herb. So you do have to grow a decent amount of it to get volume, which is why, like in row feed, it's one of the plants that we grow the most of, but like volume of harvest is not one of the most.
Right. Yeah. And I mentioned that we're trying it in our pathways, and that I was reading about how to do that. And people either said you had to use plugs, so you had to do your own starts, but I hear that it's pretty hard to do your own starts of chamomile. So I just direct seeded it and it came up great, but I just basically broadcast it on the soil in the pathways, which is, I should be clear to the listener, not something I'm necessarily recommending yet, just something I'm trialing. But yeah, are you doing your own starts? Or are you buying those in when you do it in plugs?
I do it myself. Yeah. And, I feel like I haven't had trouble with it at all as far as like germination or anything, but they definitely seem to have more issues with like transplant shock than other plants that I'm growing. And so I think that's why most people just direct seed them. I'm curious for yours, did you do direct seed them? Like what time of year did you do that? And like, what's it looking like now?
That would have been, I probably have it written down somewhere, but it would have been like September, I think. It was when we set up a new set of beds and we put some cover crop in this. So it probably would have been like September, maybe October, so around there. And I just broadcast it lightly on the soil in the pathways. And, we walked over top of that several times while we did that before we sowed our cover crop. So we were walking back and forth a lot on it, and then it got it pretty good stand. I mean, it looks pretty thick at the moment. And I couldn't tell you how much I put down per acre or per 50-foot pathway. I could probably do that division, but we got a pretty good size of seed for specifically though, we were doing the, what is it called? Is it the Roman chamomile?
Uh-huh.
And I think we did like an ounce of it for what would be like 13 beds, 13 pathways. So those are 18-inch pathways. So whatever that works out to be, if you wanted to do that math. So yeah, I mean, it seems pretty good. Like it seems like it's come up pretty thick, but we'll see how, if it's thick enough to block out some weeds. And I don't know. I'm hesitant to think it's going to work in our climate just because, like you said, we have like a very warm climate. We're in 6B2. We're not that far from you. And the reality is that our weed season is very, very long and stuff will just make it through about anything. So we'll see, but it's a fun experiment. If nothing else, it'll be fun for like a few weeks while we like walk over top of it and it smells nice.
Yeah. I'm curious to hear how it turns out.
Are you doing plant starts? Are you selling any herb starts?
I have in the past, and I'm actually still debating whether I'm going to do it this year or not. I haven't decided if I'm up for it.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of demand for it, it seems.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one that I feel like could be, starts are something that there's a good value there, since the whole production is basically just getting stuff to germinate, and then your overhead is the watering and the cost of the soil mix and the seed, and the heat if you have to use heat. But I feel like that, starts, more unique starts like that would take a bigger market maybe, but I feel like there is a demand for it.
Definitely, especially because, there's a lot of overlap between medicinal herbs and what people would plant in a garden, like for looks, but also like a pollinator garden or something like that. And so, a lot of when I did it before, a lot of people were buying the starts, not necessarily to even like with the intention to harvest and make tea or anything like that. They just wanted to attract bugs to their yard.
Oh yeah, herbs are great for that. I want herbs everywhere for that specific reason. Well, Sarah Barney, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. This has been such a fun conversation.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
All right, if you enjoyed that episode, make sure to follow Sarah and Among the Oaks on Instagram and all the places. We will hook it up with links in the show notes. Some quick ways to support our work. You can swing over to no-tillgrowers.com and pick up a copy of my book, The Living Soil Handbook. Proceeds from that sale at no-tillgrowers.com go to making you more free content. Venmo us a little bit if you'd like to @NoTillGrowers, or PayPal to notillgrowers@gmail.com. All that works too, and we super duper appreciate it. And of course, patreon.com/notillgrowers. Thank you however you find a way to support our work. Subscribe to this podcast wherever you are getting it and leave a review. But this week, all reviews will absolutely unequivocally cure boredom. Today's episode is brought to you in part by a grant from Southern SARE. Big thanks to Jackson Roulette for all of his work, Josh Satin for his video guidance, Willie Breeding for the theme music, and of course, my amazing wife, Hannah Crabtree. Thank you all for listening. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Okay, good. So I've called people on the wrong day. I've called people at the wrong time. You'd think after like several years of doing this, I'd be better at it, but no, I get it wrong all the time.
That's funny.